sporting event, and it's John 3:16, right? Everyone knows that verse. That's how most everybody is. We kind of take things that are either memorable or they are ones that are valuable to us personally, or we think they're going to be very useful in our spiritual development or conversations with others, and we add them to the list. And we gradually build what essentially becomes a portion of the Bible kind of echoing around in our head. It lives in there, and it comes up to the top of our brains the first, fastest, whenever it is necessary to think about spiritual things like this. Well, some of those things occur in this last section of James, and we'll see them when we read them together. We're going to start with a reading of James 5, verses 7 through 11. It's our first section. And Rich, do you want to read that for us, if you will? James 5, verses 7 through 11.
It says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives in the early and late rains. You also, be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider these blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful."
This is a great kind of companion text, by the way, to some of the things that Paul writes, where he says, roughly paraphrase, these things were written aforetime for our learning, so that we might have hope. And so it's a great kind of parallel text, because contextually it's the same idea. He's calling back to these ideas of the prophets of Job as indicators or key ideas to say, hey, they've been through something similar-ish, and you can look at that and glean understanding from it, and because of this, you should have hope. Pretty simple equation, right? But there's a key factor. You're only going to generate hope if there's enough substantial conviction that says, I trust. I trust this outcome. I trust that God can. I trust that God is. Because otherwise, you're just sitting there suffering. There's not a spiritual interaction with a God who is the creator of the universe, with a God who is the protector and provider. Then in the end, you're just sitting in the box waiting for the next bad foot to drop upon you. And so James is telling us that believers who suffer together are in the possibility of producing not only patience, which is one of the outcomes, but also demonstrating hope. And there's some ideas that might come up in there, and some connections to think about. But when you're reading through it, what were some of the things that came to your mind, maybe in the realm of, I've seen this play out myself before, or I've read about this in the Bible, and it played out this way before? You ever see patience pay off for folks in their lives, in life in general? It does. Are we as human beings really good at being patient? Yeah, raise your hand if you've acknowledged internally that sometimes you suffer from impulse control. Listen, it's the holidays. You're going to see a lot of cookies lying out. As Michael talked about 2 weeks ago, Oreo cookies. If you love Michael, you're going to keep those away from him. If you love Michael, you might also put a couple on the side over towards him and just see how it plays out. So impulse control is a human condition. And it's not something that is just a struggle for when we're young, spiritually or physically. It's all of those things. And that's part of what is being partially, contextually attached here. Some of the things I thought were really interesting, James identifies as a behavioral warning. Do not grumble against one another, brothers. And he uses the phrase that is similar to the church of Philippi, that has that same sense of brotherly love and affection attached to it. Don't grumble against each other when this thing is going down, when it gets more pressured and more stressful. Because you want to think about it for a second, when things start falling apart in your life, how quickly do we go from impulse control issues followed by, let me complain about this to everybody? Is that a short trip or a long trip? I think it's a pretty short trip. Then we go to the complaint. And my first illustration that I thought about is the first conversation between God and humanity that's really a full thing in Genesis. What is it that the Bible records as the dialogue between Yahweh Elohim and Adam and Eve? What does Eve say? Who does she blame? The serpent. He deceived me. He tricked me. What's Adam's defense?
She gave it to me.
Look, no, but he does two things. He does say that she gave it to me, but he throws a second hook of blame.
Woman, you gave me.
The woman you gave me. He's essentially saying, if you had not done that, God, this problem would have been here. This is your problem, not mine. It also partially understands some of the contextual applications of the curses that are given. But there's some deep prongs that really pierce into those edges. But right there, it's impulse control. That looks good to eat. I want it. And then the pressure rises up because of failed choices or external issues. And boom, blame game. It's everybody's problem but mine. Oh, woe is me. If everyone else would just straighten up, then my life would be better off. And so that leads to a couple dialogue level questions. The first one is to think about the interaction between patience, a godly expectation, and passivity, the sitting around and doing nothing. When you're facing injustice or maybe delay, how do we practice Christ-like patience without becoming, firstly, passive, but also, more importantly, apathetic? And what distinguishes biblical endurance versus merely putting up with hardship? Because there is a difference. And what would that difference be in your mind? I've got a couple of things to think about. Wes?
Wait on the Lord.
Yeah, attitude, waiting on the Lord, the way you think about it. And the key thing that came to mind for me is character is actually always modeled by behavior. And so if you're waiting on the Lord, if your attitude is, I'm just going to suffer, and your teeth grit, and you bear down on it, versus, I'm going to find a way to rejoice about this somehow. I was listening to an interview recently where an individual was talking about conceptualizing the difficulty of suffering as a blessing from God. Is it easy to be joyful about things that God grants you that are great and good? If they're good and great stuff, man, you can love it. It's wonderful. Oh, I love the first spring day. Flowers start blooming up. Did you love it very much when it was 12 degrees outside with the wind chill for some of us? How many of you were outside going, I love this just as much as the spring day? Yeah, most of us are like, this fireplace is really nice. And if I don't have a fireplace, maybe I'm going to build one inside my house until this goes through. That's a small level. But if the whole universe is upheld by the word of his power, and God at times historically has brought suffering and challenge to his disciples, and I've got to figure out how to get to a point where in all seasons I bless God, that means I've got to think about accepting that sometimes the hard road that I'm on is the road that God built for me. And God's hand is there. And that's part of this. That's that partial answer to this. I think also, and this comes a bit with some of the other New Testament context, you had a certain group of Christians who are like, you know, the Lord's coming soon, so I'm just going to lay about and stop going to work. But you still got to feed me. And what was the New Testament solution to that behavior?
You don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah, and we often cite that passage way out of its context a little bit and make it into a billy club. But the emphasis is still there. Work, eat, work, eat. Okay, understood that. There's a good correlation between working and feeding myself. Those are two things that are really well related. But here in this context, it illustrates the challenge. If you're suffering, the tendency is to give up and just let the suffering come. The last illustration comes from the dialogue of Job and his spouse. And what does she say concerning his circumstances?
Curse God and die.
Just curse God and die. Get it over with. Why are you still fighting it? You've clearly done something wrong. She had fallen for the false theology that his friends had seemingly drawn into as well. So, like I mentioned already, James warns against community pushing against one another, grumbling against one another. Why is it then that communities of Christians even sometimes turn inward with criticism? Why are we our harshest critics? Remember what Job's friends were saying to him? Clearly you must have sinned. Repent. You must have done something wrong. When one of your brothers or sisters is going through it in ways that you can't fathom, the very last thing that they need is someone showing up and telling them, you know, if you had just taken my advice, you wouldn't be here. Doesn't look, even if you're 1,000% correct, more correct than you've ever been in your life, if you switch the roles and someone told you that, what are you going to do? Are you going to look at them and go, yeah, you're right? Or are you going to go, that hurt? That's the first normal response. That really hurt. I thought you were here to make me have some countenance go up. Are you here to put more pressure on me? There's a time to reflect and to consider and grant wisdom and gain it. But that's usually after a bit of recovery, a bit of understanding. If someone's in the pit, they know they're in the pit. What they're waiting for is someone to take some soft clothing, tie it onto the rope, lower it down so they can get pulled up out of the pit. That's another, Old Testament allusion, if you will. Les?
What we're kind of saying in a lot of this stuff is, if everybody was just like me, everything would be perfect.
That is the attitude that I think a lot of us struggle with, and we don't admit it. We project our sense of self-understanding and self kind of control. And so I got this figured out. How come you don't have it figured out yet? Well, because you experienced this already once, developed some maturity through that process. And there's a t-shirt I saw a while back that maybe I probably should wear more, get one to wear that says, "This is my first rodeo." I think that's part of our human experience. By the way, you'll never see me in a rodeo. Because if you do, that means I'm basically guaranteeing a trip to the ER. So just so we get these pieces together. I'm not going to be the clown. I'm not going to be on the critter. I'm not going to be around the critter. It's not going to go well. Stuart, do you want to read verse 12 for us? It's the next part of our reading.
But above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath. But your yes is to be yes, and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment.
Pretty straight parallel to something that Jesus says, right? Part of the Sermon on the Mount, the integrity of your worth. Just a quick reminder, first century, not just amongst Christians, not just amongst Jews, not just amongst the Palestinian Israel region, but it's a fairly normal thing to have your word have different levels of concreteness. That if you do certain things, you're swearing it to a higher and higher standard. We still do that. How many of you in your life have ever pinky swore with one of your friends? Pinky swear? Or back in my day for the Gen X folks, if someone says they're going to do something but their hands are behind their back and their fingers are crossed, what do they indicate regarding the accuracy of their commitment? They're lying, straight up. You know, if those fingers are crossed in the back in my day, you're not going to do the thing you're saying you're going to do. So we know that human beings do this, and we still do it today. Did you sign the contract? Oh, you didn't sign it? Okay. But I agreed to do it, but did you sign the contract? Well, we have to think about these things. That means there's wisdom of making sure to wait a second before you agree to do something, contract or not. Because you may still be accountable for it, even if the contract says something different. And your conscience is always going to be part of this equation. And so part of what James is pointing towards is the broad, and this is like a connecting idea to what he had just talked about and what's coming further, is that, listen, if you're going to commit to something, you're also going to be expected to follow through, independent of whatever hoops you jump through. Whether you go to the altar and hold on to the horns, which is an allusion back to the Sermon on the Mount, whether first century or 21st century, you give all these extra commitments. Oh yeah, I'm absolutely going to do it. You can count on it. You just trust. Okay, well, the first yes was enough. That's the expectation. So my question is that why is it that we feel like, especially when it comes to bringing God's name into a context, why do we feel like as humans we've got to do that? Like, my example is, this was said to me recently, this is the God's honest truth. I'm like, okay, that's a lot of extra adjectives. Maybe what you're saying isn't as truthful as you're trying to get me to think that it is. But why do humans do that? Why do we do that? Why do we feel the need to like make that grand show?
And want to be believed.
Yeah. Let me turn the tables a little bit, a different angle of this. Have you ever had people not believe you when you were telling the truth? When you're straight up telling the truth of a thing and they just don't believe you? How's that feel? If you've been a kid, sometimes your parents have accused you of doing something you didn't do because the other sibling did it. But they were the one closest, so they got blamed. So everyone knows this experience to one degree or another. I think that's part of it there, where we're trying to protect the idea of our integrity. And there's one more component. If you've lied in the past to that person, you may feel compelled to go 2 more steps because of the hurt. And that's all kind of built in the same area there. So then how does cultivating simple, consistent truthfulness, yes means yes, no means no, strengthen 2 things, your relationships and evangelistically your witness, your testimony, your evidence of who you are? Is it important to be generally a truthful person if you're trying to teach someone about Christ? Well, yeah. Can a liar bring someone to the gospel? Sure. Yeah, actually Paul deals with a bit of that. He says, independent of their moral failings to some of these false teachers, he still rejoiced when the truth was taught. But if you make an assertion, let's say Jesus rose from the dead, but nobody can trust what you say, that's going to be a harder path to go. And so it's a pretty easy thing to recognize, hey, maybe there's some things to think about on how that lands. That leads us to the interconnected last point. Sometimes we're independent of our big questions in the smaller areas, tempted or feel like we have to overpromise, give extra I promise, I promise, I promise, or shade the truth. Is that a temptation that Christians struggle with? Well, there's no temptation that isn't common to man, so the answer to that is yes. How many of you guys have ever worked in sales before? I've worked in sales before. Is the sales environment full of opportunities to live in the gray area? It is. Did you guys have coworkers that lived in that gray area and seemed to make more money than you did? I don't know whether they did or not. I had some who did. It seemed like they made more money than I was making. Maybe they were more charismatic, but it felt like they were always able to squeeze $2 out of $1 on these sheets some way or another. Never believe that you're not the one who would be tempted by those kinds of things, and just be honest and real with it. And that's part of what this context can help us as a last benefit. Say, look, this could be me. I could be the one whom James is secondarily writing to, but I need to hear this. Long run, most of that stuff doesn't matter. Long run, all the guys I know that were playing fast and loose when they were in the sales area that I was in eventually got fired and eventually had to deal with the consequences of their choices. Some of them didn't, but I'm not in contact with them anymore, so maybe they never got caught. You may have had similar experiences. I think there's always a bill that comes due for that kind of moral behavior. Next part of the text, this starts in verse 13. Let's see. Eric, you looked up, you made eye contact. You know the standard risk there. Would you read for us, please? 13 through 18 of chapter 5.
Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms. Is anyone among you sick? Let him come to the elders of the church and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. A prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Confess your trespasses to one another, and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. He prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit.
A lot of things for us to consider here, but there's 3 big words that I thought were at least a little bit important for us to note. Number 1, suffering. Number 2, cheerful. And number 3, sick. It's interesting that those are, at least in the first part of the text, the big action ideas. And there's some area in which we think about some of these terms. We'll look at the last one, which is the one that often has a lot of questions about it in a second. But pay attention to these first 2. If any one of you is suffering, the first medicinal solution that James offers is what? Pray. Is that how we respond to suffering? Not how we should respond, but it is how we typically respond. How do you respond when you're suffering? What's your normal behavior?
Complaining.
Complaining, go lay down. I curl up in a ball and I don't want to be peopled. I go opposite of my standard personality. My standard personality is super extrovert, but if I'm not feeling good, just lock me into a box, close the door, slide some food under the door. I'll come out when things are better. That's like my behavior. Poke me every now and again with a stick like a bear. I growl, I'm not ready yet. But that's not the godly solution to the problem, is it? Especially if we go off of, I have the man flu and I might die, to true spiritual suffering, where I'm wearied out because of the concern of my soul or someone else's soul. That's when we need to pray. And that's what the biblical push is in the text. The second thing is interesting because it's the counterpart to it. If anyone is cheerful, what is the expectation?
Happiness.
Sing praise. How many of us think we're good singers? I don't see anyone raising their hands. Most of us are average singers. You know that? Math tells me that nearly all of us are average singers. By the bell curve, based on experience and the time we've spent in congregational singing, statistically, you're probably better singers than average. If you've ever actually sung a song other than Happy Birthday, you're now mathematically moving to the other end of the curve. But do you feel uncomfortable singing in front of other people? By yourself? Two people? Would you sit up on a microphone and go, karaoke night, ready to go sing? Stuart, you ready to lead singing yet? She's like, absolutely not, absolutely not. That's why he's going to be doing invitations soon. That's right. Playing it out. I did in my notes actually to mention that. This is something I think is important, that what we think about this phrase, singing praise and praising and rejoicing, isn't exactly what is going on here. Rejoice, loudly bring forth, be happy about it. The parallel to think about, how many of you are fans of this football team that's over in Athens, Georgia? Carson, are you now one of them, Carson? He's been adopted over there. Have you forgotten about Oregon? Slightly, okay. How do your typical Bulldog fans feel when they beat Alabama? Is there cheering? I mean, when they beat...
Singing praise.
Singing praise. That's the parallel. The kind of rejoicing you have when a victory of earthly endeavor takes place should be taking place in the spiritual realm. And it's okay to emote, have feelings. In the context of your world is fine. And actually it's good and it's healthy. And imagine what it does to the others who are around you, who maybe just a little while ago were suffering and now they're seeing the good come. There's some great interplay there to think about how these things impact one another. Which leads us to our last part of that passage, which is the most challenging one. Anyone who's sick, what are they supposed to do? Call for the elders to do what? Raise your hand if you've ever felt that passage was weird. It is. I've written about it because I think it's a little weird in the modern context. I think most folks, when they read that, though, they hear sick, and what do they immediately think of? What kind of sick does that word imply for them? Physical. Your body's breaking down. But I want you to pay attention to the context of James 5 in particular. Is the focus there our physical bodies or something else? Is there something else at play there?
Spiritual.
It's a spiritual body. There's a spiritual perspective there. It doesn't mean that when you're sick, the elders shouldn't come check on you and pray for you. They can't come because I'm physical. No, that's a separate thing. But it does mean that there's something more complicated going on there. Are there any other stories in the Bible of someone being anointed with oil? Is that a thing you read about in the New Testament at all? Who is that? A couple of you have whispered it. We talk about him a lot on Sunday mornings, especially at the Lord's Supper. Jesus. He was anointed with oil. In light of his incoming grotesque manifestation as the glorified Son of God. In advance of his crucifixion, he was anointed. So there's some things going on there that indicate culturally this is a normal thing. Maybe there is a body edge to it, but it's a body edge in light of spiritual turmoil that's going on. And the language here is actually a little bit more off of the physical things to the spiritual too, on the grammar and the Greek that's employed there. So the emphasis really is actually, look, things are getting really bad, spiritually or otherwise. It's perfectly fine to engage in the first century practice or a 21st century version of it. We don't use oil that way anymore. If you've got any alabaster vials of oil for us to use, then let me know. We'll put them on eBay and make a ton of money out of it, and then we'll actually use it to help the poor, unlike what took place in the Gospels, because that stuff's pretty expensive. But I want you to think about then what it says as the follow-on. And Eric already read this. The prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up. So the imagery there is also still connected to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which probably indicates that this is even more deeply connected to a spiritual meaning rather than the bodily, harm side. I think that's what's going on, by the way, in the text with this phrasing there, because it then closes out a similar prayer with Elijah, a man with a nature like ours, has that capacity to do amazingly good things. As such, then, the big picture of the text, in any circumstance, pain, praise, illness, or sin, go to God in prayer and in righteous hearts. I think that's kind of what's being laid out there. And it's latched on to verse 12, which is a consistency of character. If you trust God, then when these kind of things occur, then going to God is the natural outcome. Any thoughts or questions? I know we kind of smooshed all of that into one shorter section. We got one more passage to look at tonight too. All right, last section. This is verses 19 and 20. James, do you want to read that for us?
My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins.
It's a pretty hopeful passage, right? You ever feel, let's break it into two areas. How many of you feel like sometimes with your evangelistic, trying to get people to leave the world and to come into the kingdom, that you're not as successful as you'd like to be? Right? Let me go to the other end of the table that James is talking about. To your friends, family, loved one, and brethren who have once tasted righteousness but have returned back into the world, how many of you feel like you're not as effective as you'd like to be? Absolutely. I'm equally disappointed at times with the outcome. And yet, in both cases, God tells me that I have a part, but I'm not the one who controls the outcome. I have my portion to play in each of those equations. I have a role, if you will, an active, not passive, active role. And in the context here, the high level of persecution, the potential for physical conflict going on, this is a strong picture of be mindful, wait for it, of how you handle these things. Because how you're handling it is going to play into the outcome of what happens. You say, what do you mean by how? Well, number one, when you see someone wandering, that's the time to move. Not after they've past tense wandered. And I think that's a key component that we sometimes struggle with, because most of us, myself included, struggle with saying something at that middle space time. Because we're afraid we don't want to be, I told you so, a legit thing. But if you saw someone getting closer and closer to the edge of a cliff, are you like, and they're backing up to it for a photo, and they're just backing up to the cliffs behind them, they're backing up, you going to say something? Or you know, maybe I won't say something, but maybe I'll just go walk over there and stop them, because if I say something, maybe they'll fall over the edge. Maybe I'll just intercede a little bit. I think most of us would try to intercede. The same thing takes place here. there's something strange in human behavior and in human culture that we don't always handle this well. Here's a parallel to it. Let's say 5 of us are now back and we magically are all teenagers together, any 5 of us. And we're all, let's say, 15. So we can't drive yet, but communally we decide to do something dumb. We go and find our uncle's pickup truck and we take it out into the fields, and all 5 of us are there involved in it, but we run that truck into a tree. And our uncle finds us, and 4 of them are faster than 1 of them. Does the one who was slow rat out his friends? Does he rat him out? There's a whole cultural thing that, you don't be a rat. Especially when you're young, right? Can't rat out your friends. Don't be a snitch, because what do snitches get? Yeah, here's the thing. You're not in the mob. You are not in the mafia. You are people who care about other people. And if you change it from our little easy illustration, easily everyone's accountable. The one dude shouldn't have to hang all the responsibility on him. He's just going to suffer. He'll break eventually, and they already know who the other 4 are anyway. They already got it figured out. They knew you were all ne'er-do-wells together because you've been doing ne'er-do-well stuff the whole time. But the big picture is to recognize, hey, maybe there's actually some good from the warning, and maybe it needs to happen earlier in the equation, before you get in the truck, or before you incrementally go down that road. And maybe if someone had said, hey, that's not really a great idea. It's not really a wise choice. That's part of that how. And the outcome of a little bit of warning is a little bit of protection. Now, one more step. The text does also include those who have wandered. How can we get better at bringing folks back who have wandered? Do you think you and I potentially play a part in making it tough for someone to return to the Lord? At some point in your life, you're going to have to accept the fact that, yes, sometimes I'm the problem. Sometimes the problem's me. So what do you mean? Well, it could be my attitude. I could have unintentionally or intentionally been part of the problem by being judgmental or plain wrong. I came to the wrong conclusion about what someone did, judged them, believed I was right, but I was wrong. There's a component of this that we've got to become really good at reconciliation if we want the full picture of this, which is someone coming all the way back to the Lord and a multitude of sins being covered by that behavior. One other component is I want you to think about your ability to contact people who you used to worship with that maybe live in the area. There's a component of Christian behavior that says, I can't be around them anymore because we insert reasons. Because I think they're a bad influence. They might be. Because someone said I needed to withdraw from them. Could be. Could be that's what you need to do. But maybe you need to apply that in a different way. Because if you have no interaction with them ever, what kind of admonition or change of behavior exists? My illustration is always this. This is my standard version. If you see someone, a brother in Christ, who has made a mess of their lives, so much so that they've abandoned their practice of faith, and maybe their faith altogether, and you see them in the grocery store, and they're buying pet food that day, guess what you're buying that day? Pet food. You're going on the aisle. Is that an awkward moment? Sure. Absolutely. But who's it more awkward for, you or them?
Probably them.
Probably. Because if they see you, you don't have to say a word. All that bubbles up to the top. Guess what you got to do? You get to be nice and kind. Tell them you love them. And mean it. And listen. Those are not hard things to do. They become hard maybe if you're the one who were hurt by their sin. That's a different thing. But you get to have that chance, that opportunity. And you could extrapolate all the different ways in which that can play out, and you can be that person. And that doesn't change the fact that, yes, it's hard, and yes, you're going to be awkward, but they're probably going to be more awkward, more uncomfortable, and it's okay. Because the outcome is so much more glorious. Because how good would it be if the following Sunday or 2 years later, you're sitting in the pew and they just go, whoop, sliding right behind you and say, hey, remember 2 years ago? That's a real conversation that can take place, that has taken place, that I've seen play out, and you may have as well. Key phrases there that tie into the earlier text: saves their soul from death. That's a big, powerful one. Covers a multitude of sins, another powerful one. It's similar to Proverbs chapter 10, verse 12. Love covers offenses. It's similar also to 1 Peter 4:8, which is combining those two ideas. Love covers a multitude of sins. James doesn't go into specificity as to which soul is being rescued here. He's just saying doing this kind of thing saves souls. Which leads me to think about this. If you don't live in a way that calls people back to the Lord, I would suggest that maybe your soul needs to be evaluated in this context too. If you don't want them to come back, that becomes a you problem, not a them problem. And it's certainly in context there. Les, I think our clock has hit us completely, and so we must stop here. We'll be continuing with kind of an interplay next Wednesday night where we pay attention to both Galatians and James and lay them side by side and have a bit of a dialogue about that. Thanks, everyone.